to the July 28th meeting of the Safe Communities Committee Community Committee. We have got just one item on the agenda today, so we'll jump right in after introductions. So we've got 4 of our committee members on. I'm Larkin Eggleston, committee chair.
Greg Cripps, vice chair.
Tark Bakari.
Matt Newton, committee member.
Mr. Bakari.
Tark Bakari, committee member.
And staff that are on with us.
Christina Thigpen, economic development.
Anybody else want to introduce themselves?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. Debbie Smith, Charlotte Department of Transportation.
Charlotte Lamb, City Manager's Office.
Sandy Vestal, Public Affairs, CMPD.
Jessica Battle, Police Attorney's Office.
Steve Rochute, Deputy Chief, Patrol Services.
Emily Kunze, City Manager's Office.
Julia Martin, City Manager's Office.
Brett Few, Police Attorney's Office.
All right, Ms. Kunze, who's going to be leading our presentation?
Debbie Smith will be starting us off.
Great.
Well, good afternoon, Chair and committee. We have prepared a PowerPoint presentation to share some information with you today. I have Charlotte Lamb and Brett Few that are going to help me today with this presentation. Next slide, please. So on July 11th, Mayor Lyles referred the topic of social districts to this committee, and the policy question put forth is to determine if social districts should be implemented in Charlotte. The committee's charge is to review the potential benefits and or issues with establishing the social districts, review the requirements for establishing social districts, work with staff to assess options and considerations specific to Charlotte, and last, report findings and recommendation back to full council for consideration. Next slide, please. So just as a reminder, what is a social district? It is an area that is defined where a person may consume alcoholic beverages sold by a permittee. That area can include both indoors and outdoor business locations. It is connected to or can be connected to public streets, sidewalks, crosswalks, and other parking areas. So really just simply put, it is a place where a person may purchase a to-go beverage and walk around and enjoy establishment to establishment. The enabling legislation was first put into place in October of 2021. And earlier this month, House Bill 211 provided some additional clarifications, very specific to the components of that original authorization. So really specifically what should be codified by the local entities. Next slide, please. So benefits of the social district. So there are many benefits to the social district. It really spurs that economic development and community involvement. And it's accomplished by increasing the foot traffic in and around the retail businesses, bars, and restaurants. And there is a potential for expanded revenue as bars, restaurants, as they serve those to-go beverages. And those areas within the social district really can become destination. Those areas also are successful in attracting potential new businesses that want to be part of the social districts. And for us here in Charlotte, we know a handful of businesses have expressed interest in establishing social districts. Those locations, though, as we've talked about before, are not in just one concentrated area, but really are located throughout the city. So next slide, please. The House bill and the legislative requirements are very specific on what must be established on the city side as well as the social district side. On the city side, city councils must adopt ordinance designating that social district. It must include days and hours of operations, the specific boundaries and the maintenance and management plan. The city must also publish the council-adopted maintenance and management plan on a website, and the city must register the social district within the North Carolina Alcohol Beverage Control Commission. So in addition to that, the social districts must define boundaries with signs noting those days and hours of operation, and the beverage can only be consumed in those defined boundaries, and that beverages must be disposed of before leaving the social district. The alcohol law enforcement phone number must be clearly displayed, and businesses that do not sell alcohol must have a sign letting customers know that they are allowed and are opting in to bring beverages that were purchased elsewhere in the permitted establishments into their business. Next slide, please. There are also requirements on the ABC permittee side. They can only sell on their premises. The container cannot be glass and a maximum of 16 fluid ounces. It contains the district logo and identifies the business name. There's also important messaging that talks about drink responsibly. Non-permitted businesses, so those not selling alcoholic beverages, can opt in to allow the consumption of beverages on their premises, but they must post signage that they're allowing it. And they must also allow law enforcement access to the customers during the social district hours. And so next, I'm going to turn it over to Charlotte Lamb to talk about our Peer City research.
Of course. So you've seen some of these examples in previous presentations, but the pool of participating cities has really grown this summer. In Kannapolis, that was the first municipality to implement a social district in North Carolina when they opened it for Oktoberfest in 2021. Their district is located in an entertainment district that was really designed for public gathering. It's adjacent to the baseball stadium and includes their linear park in that area. Norwood and Newton both opened their districts in December of last year. These municipalities both use the districts as an economic development tool. Newton used the district to lure residents into their downtown, when Norwood used the district to lure businesses. In fact, Norwood had no ABC permitted businesses in the district when it was established, and now they have one sushi restaurant with a license. So obviously these examples aren't directly comparable to the scope and scale of Charlotte, but they were operating within the same state parameters and have really grasped it as an economic development tool. Greensboro was the first large city to enact a district. Their district opened in March of this year and was much larger than any of the examples we had previously seen. Downtown Greensboro, who manages the municipal service district, worked with the city to pass the ordinance and then handled all of the promotion communications with businesses. The president of that organization said that they haven't had any issues and described the district as a sipping and strolling environment that has really increased foot traffic with all their retailers in the area. And then when we spoke to Greensboro Police, they let us know that they didn't have many concerns to the district. Their district is open from noon to 9 p.m. daily. Cornelius's social district is also known as the Lake Norman Social District. And this was actually spearheaded by two ABC permitted establishments that were on adjacent blocks and wanted access to this new state tool for St. Patrick's Day festivities earlier this year. So their council adopted a temporary ordinance to pilot the district in the area. That went really well. So now the temporary ordinance has become permanent, and they expanded their geography to include the Kane Center for the Arts, which is set to open later this year, and will just diversify the types of businesses in that area. Monroe's social district opened last month and includes 8 permitted ABC businesses. Monroe had a really large gap of time between when their ordinance was adopted and implementation, and it allowed all of their promotional materials to be really well done and thought out. Each business was provided a window cling that indicates if a business sells to-go, allows to-go cups inside, or does not allow those to-go cups. And that has been really well received by visitors and businesses alike. South Salisbury just opened this month, and it's of interest to us because they included their public parks, but offered more limited hours of consumption within those parks. This is the first municipality where we've seen different hours of operation within one district, so that's just something to keep an eye on. And then Raleigh has adopted their ordinance, and it's set to open in August. Since they're not operating yet, we can't take any hard lessons learned, but we can look at their implementation plan. They were concerned about public drunkenness and litter, so their council decided to reevaluate the district after 6 months in operation. They stated that at that time, they may extend the district or create districts in other areas of the city if it's been deemed a success. Staff is also keeping an eye on Albemarle, Ashboro, Hickory, and Mooresville, which all have newly adopted districts. So that brings our count to at least 12 social districts in North Carolina today. Next slide, Britt. So outside of North Carolina, Ohio social districts are called DORAs, or Designated Outdoor Refreshment Areas. Each municipality is permitted to have 6 DORAs, and they're approved by their council on a first-come, first-served basis. The responsibility is on the neighborhood or merchant organization to manage these DORAs, and that includes paying for things like additional solid waste services. In Cincinnati, there are 4 approved districts, and right now 2 of them are at the implementation phase. The first district on the ground was the Banks, and it was located in an entertainment district that includes the NFL stadium where the Bengals play and minor league baseball stadium. This district has been operational since March of 2021 and is open from 11 a.m. to 1 a.m. Implementation went smoothly so that the second social district, Westwood, was approved in December with a much different context. So Westwood is a Main Street environment that's adjacent to residential, similar to what you might find in Plaza Midwood or NODA. And it's been so well received that the hours of operation were extended in June of this year. So the 2 districts that Cincinnati has also adopted but haven't started yet are also very similar in scale to Westwood. Columbus is an example of a stadium district. So their district includes the facilities for NHL games, baseball, and MLS. But this district only operates on days where there are home games or events like concerts in the arena. So the district opens 3 hours before the event start time and closes at midnight on those days. This is also interesting because they use 100% compostable cups in this area. Huntsville, Alabama took an extremely incremental approach when they began with weekend hours and temporary sidewalk markers over 8 years ago. Since then, they've changed their borders 40 to 50 times and expanded operations to 7 days a week from noon to 11. That level of flexibility isn't viable in a state that requires boundaries to be adopted into local ordinances like is required in North Carolina, but there's still certainly something we can take away from that level of flexibility. They're known for their purple Solo cups with their to-go beverages, and these cups have become iconic and can be seen on t-shirts and even purchased on art in the district. North Carolina's law was actually based off of Michigan's, so we're the most comparable on paper to Grand Rapids ordinance. Grand Rapids began with 3 separate social districts, but found managing 3 was too difficult. So they combined and expanded into 1 district. The district really helps them fulfill their goal of being a 4-season city as it's increased foot traffic during the winter months. With their labeling requirements of the cups being the same as North Carolina, some of their breweries have brewed in cans that have that required language, which allows them to participate in social districts by selling cans and reducing the use of single-use plastic in the district. This is something that would be legal in North Carolina, and we would love to see happen organically in Charlotte. But on the other side, we have a cautionary tale, and that's from Denver, Colorado. In Denver, they required interested areas to go through the process of becoming an entertainment district. which offers, several steps of approval and applications. And that is before applying to become a common consumption area or social district. Since June of last year, they've had no applications due to that higher barrier of entry. I have the next slide, Britt. Thanks. So Charlotte's different than the other North Carolina examples we heard. And that's because, as Debbie mentioned earlier, we have multiple areas that are interested in having a district. And some of them are outside of that central business district. Whereas all the examples we've looked at have had existing high levels of service and pedestrian infrastructure because they were either, in that central business district, were a Main Street or an entertainment district location that was really built for that. So infrastructure needs will need to be evaluated when considering other geographies for districts, as well as impacts to adjacent residential uses will need to be taken into account. Next slide, Britt. So now we're gonna pass it off to Brett to talk a little bit about the meat of the ordinance.
Thank you, Charlotte. So the proposed language for the new social district ordinance was sent out in your pre-read. The ordinance would be housed in chapter 15 in a new article in our city code. I'm just going to summarize what that new article would look like and why it would contain what it contains. First thing to be clear on is that this new proposed ordinance language would not actually create any social districts in Charlotte. It would simply create the framework for the city to be able to consider future proposals for social districts in Charlotte and lay the ground rules for those social districts. Pretty much all of what's in this proposed language mirrors what the state legislature passed into law and what Debbie talked about earlier with the requirements on cups and what language would have to be on those cups and the boundaries that would have to be established and signage. But to go into this back to the PowerPoint and look at the bullet points, there are multiple sections obviously within the new proposed language. The first being the purpose and application section, which would pretty much lay out the authority for Charlotte to create social districts and emphasize that Charlotte plans to follow the rules laid out by the state. There'd be a definitions section, which would make clear what all the lingo means when we're talking about social districts. The sale of open containers section would reiterate what the rules are for selling alcohol within a social district, again, mirroring what the state has already said would be required. Non-permittees responsibility, what Debbie touched on earlier, this would make it clear what non-permittees would be required to do. So a non-permittee, for example, would be like a clothing store that was within a social district, a place that doesn't sell alcohol. They wouldn't be required to check IDs when people come in, but they would be required to have appropriate signage so that people entering would know whether or not they're participating in the social district. There'd be a possession and consumption section, which would lay the rules for what the people who actually purchase the alcohol can do with it, what they can't do with it, where can they go, what's allowed and what is not. There's a section on multi-tenant establishments. When we're talking about multi-tenant establishments, think of an area like Camp North End, where it's one development with multiple businesses. Essentially, this section would allow for some overlap with those types of areas with social districts. There's also a standards and provisions section. This section would create or allow the city manager to create requirements for the establishment. In other words, the application process, the management and maintenance of these social districts. This section would also ensure that before any social district is actually created, the management and maintenance plan of that social district would have to be approved by City Council. The exceptions section allows for the city manager to suspend a social district for health and safety reasons. That's, I'm guessing, a result of what we've just gone through with COVID and perhaps some other potential issues that could come up with a social district. And finally, there's a placeholder section that would be within the article. So essentially, we've reserved some space for housing the actual establishment of social districts if they are created. The last thing that's worth mentioning is down there in bold at the bottom. We would also be modifying the current section 15-3, which houses our open container ordinance. That would be modified to accommodate for the potential creation of these social districts. And I think I'll turn it back over to Debbie after that.
Very good. Next slide, please, Britt. Thanks. On the screen that you see here, just a recap of what's been done in our conversations with council on this topic. As we really round out what the mayor's referral sought, what I would just leave the group with is just some final comments and more discussion about quality of life. And really what that means is just residential areas that are very close to potential boundaries that would be created. We heard some question about what that means and how that would be serviced. There was also some concern about city services. Charlotte touched on that just a little bit in terms of our infrastructure. Would there be a impact to public safety or solid waste? And then we also heard some discussion about the process by which this came to the group and the priority of social districts at this time. And then lastly, we heard about, just some sustainability questions, but I do think we have some really good examples from peer cities that we can lean to for that information. So Britt, last slide. Mayor's referral, very good. So Chairman Eggleston, I'll turn this back over to you and we're here for questions.
Thank you all so much. For any committee members, if you'll use the raise hand function, I'll keep an eye on that and we can address whatever questions you might have. A couple of things that I noticed in there. One, I would, and some of these decisions, again, would be made on a district by district basis, as was outlined. All these other municipalities have decided to do one district, at least for the time being. We're trying to create a process for the interest that's been expressed from multiple parts of our city. So sort of an entirely different process, which I think explains why ours is taking a little longer, because there's far more to unpack when you're creating a process that multiple areas will bring forward, plan for. And I do want to reiterate to everyone watching that this is not what will hopefully happen today is the committee will send a recommendation to the full council for an August 22nd vote. But on August 23rd, there will not be a social district operating. It simply allows for social districts in Charlotte. And then, as has been stated here, each one would bring forward its own individual plan that would outline how they're going to mitigate those valid concerns that have been expressed around making sure that it doesn't lead to additional litter, that it doesn't lead to additional noise or any kind of detriments to quality of life in the surrounding areas, that identifies that geographic footprint of what exactly the district would entail in each of those. One thing I would say that I really liked when you were talking about some of the peer cities or other cities that have implemented these, one of the things I really liked was the idea of, I believe you said it was Grand Rapids, of some of the breweries there actually putting the information on the aluminum beer can, because one of the concerns I have is around that use of single use plastic. So I love one of the cities you said was using compostable cups. Another was having breweries put it right on the can, so there's not an additional element of waste there. So love that idea, and I think a lot of businesses in Charlotte would really embrace that. One that was a little bit of a red flag to me was the idea of having different hours within the same district. And I believe that example was Salisbury. In one of their parks, the park hours were more limited than the hours outside of the parks. And that would really be causing confusion amongst people who are trying to participate and they're trying to follow the rules. So I do hope that whatever we move forward would be as simple as we can make it for the people participating, both from a business standpoint and a patron standpoint, to have that consistency of hours so that as they walk into a park, they're not suddenly subject to some different set of rules if the park is part of the district. And again, I think the goal with this committee meeting is for us to move towards a motion today that would be a recommendation from this committee to the full council that Charlotte adopt the ordinance language allowing for social districts in our city. And that would be for an August 22nd vote. And again, thereafter, individual applications and plans would come forward that would also require council approval in each instance before a district could actually be up and operating. And I think also, for the sake of making sure that we get proper community input prior to the vote, I would ask that we make that motion include a request of the manager to add to the August 15th council agenda a public comment period on this topic that would be a week before we would potentially take a vote on it. Mr. Bakari, you have a question?
Yeah, I was just going to make a comment. I think this is really a no-brainer. And I think that the key phrase for everyone to remember here in the community is powerful economic tool. On one side of the coin, as you look in this post-pandemic world, a lot of our businesses, particularly small businesses, particularly hospitality and tourism, are still struggling mightily. And we don't know what the future will hold even beyond that with the pandemic. So having an option that both increases revenue opportunities and draws of customers to them and provides outdoor, not confined indoor options, I think is truly a no-brainer as point one. But then I think in that phrase, the key word that Mr. Eggleston said is tool, right? We're not going and saying this is it. We're bringing a tool to town that we have been authorized to use. And if our community decides that the tool is a fit for them, then it'll happen. And if they don't, it won't. And I like the analogy. It's really similar to, our zoning classifications. We have industrial zoning. We have mixed use. It doesn't mean that's what's every neighborhood is going to be. And then all the voices come together, the business community, but also the neighbors and quality of life. And to have the options to use that tool specifically, maybe it's 6-month trials for some that want to see how it goes. The flexibility is there. It puts the power in the hands of the community and allows us to really unlock a powerful economic tool. So I'll go ahead and make the motion that we pass this out of committee to a public forum on the 15th and to council consideration and vote on the 22nd.
Second.
Mr. Bakari and Mr. Newton, thank you. And we'll move. We've got the motion in the second, but I know Mr. Phipps has some comment as well. Mr. Phipps?
Yeah, I guess it looks to me that this is sort of a two-step process, because I mean the policy question states that what we're doing now, we're answering the question through this referral if a social district should be implemented. But I thought that what we were doing was trying to give them the framework by which, if a decision is made to implement the district, that they would have the language in place to move forward. So are these two separate things that we're talking about, or
So
that's what I'm trying to get clarity on.
I'll answer that, and if staff thinks they can do it more eloquently than me, please step in. But I think what we're doing here is we are allowing for social districts broadly and conceptually, but each one will have to be approved individually. So I think what you're saying is the same thing this is saying, just in different words, which is we are approving social districts. We are allowing for social districts in Charlotte. That does not, in and of itself, put one into implementation. That would require another approval, because we've already approved social districts are allowed in Charlotte if we move forward in this way. Council will have to approve each individual plan that is brought forward that says, we have a plan in place to address the concerns that have been expressed. We have a plan in place that has taken into account community input from that specific geographic area and the adjacent neighbors. And then council would say, you've now, in the same way that we have a framework that allows for historic districts, but you have to bring forward a plan and community feedback and all that to actually become one. Does that answer your question, or you want to let somebody else take a crack at it?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that clarifies it. I did have some other questions on some of the provisions in the language that was gone over staff here. one of them is the definition of a social district. Seems kind of broad. I'm trying to figure out what is the difference between the social district and what we have now in terms of you have outdoor dining where drinks could be consumed. Is the difference that they just can't get up and walk around with it, or what?
So the main difference as I see it is someone's alcohol permit. If you're at, Main Street Cafe, their alcohol permit has certain geographic parameters on their property, and that might now include more outdoor dining than it used to. But you couldn't then walk next door into the Phipps Mercantile general store and with your drink. But in the future, a social district would allow that general store to have a sticker on the front window that says they're part of the social district, and you can bring the drink that you bought next door in the approved cup with the right verbiage on the cup. You could bring it to the store and consume it while you shop, or you could walk down the street to another establishment a block or two away with that drink in hand on the sidewalk. That's not currently allowed. All that would be allowed now is you're still on the site and still on the property of the restaurant you're dining in. You could have the drink outside there. You just couldn't leave that property currently.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, now who is responsible for what goes on in a social district?
Somebody from staff want to feel that. I think it's going to be a team of a shared responsibility. I think each of these plans will have to address that for the specific area, but staff.
Yeah, so Mr. Phipps, this is Debbie here. What I would say is that, as Chairman Eggleston eloquently stated, each of the districts, as they start to come into application, will really have to define what it is that is happening within there. For example, trash pickup, that sort of thing. Does that answer your question?
Well, yeah, I was just trying to figure out if something happens in a social district, something nefarious or whatever, would the liability be on the establishing social district group? Or, I'm trying to figure out, is it a shared type responsibility or something that's confined to a local one establishment within the group? If something happens, on the premises of one of the, I guess, permittees or whatever, is that something that's shared amongst the whole social district, or is that permittee responsible for what happens there?
So, Brett, you mind jumping in on that?
So, hi, Mr. Phipps, Jessica Battle, Police Attorney's Office. So, I think it would be dependent on exactly what happens, and I think we could what if it all day. But just for example, if someone were to participate in bad conduct and it was believed that they were overserved by alcohol, potentially the entity then the alcohol could have some responsibility, which could be separate from the entity where the nefarious behavior occurred. So I think it's just going to depend on exactly what happens and where and sort of the rationale, but also at the end of the day, people are still responsible for their own actions. So there could be personal liability against someone from another citizen if something were to happen in the district. But I think there are just so many variables. We couldn't really predict whether there could be potential liability on the city. I think it would just depend on exactly what happened.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I could just jump in, I based on what I've seen, what I would expect to see inside applications would be answering those questions. And just like if it was a restaurant operating or a group wanting to do a concert in Symphony Park or a flea market, they would have to show that a group does indeed have liability insurance for the entire district. And then individual companies that are part of it, it has to be covered in their liability insurance as well.
Okay.
So, yeah. Should I continue?
Go ahead.
Mr. Phipps, Charlotte Lamb was going to just contribute some additional information about our knowledge.
Yeah, we've been working really closely with the city's risk management staff, and they looked at what CDOT requires in terms of liability insurance if we were to, shut down the street for a festival or similar. And they determined that the liability insurance that every business with an ABC permit has to have is actually above and beyond what they would require for liability insurance for a festival. So they determined that the district did not need to pull out their own license, but instead we would figure out some registration way or point of contact for each one of these businesses. And the state already manages their insurance and, make sure that they're up to date on that. And that's just what we would pull should that ever need to happen.
Oh, okay. As far as the container requirements go, they said something about a city or social district logo. Does the city logo on a cup, do you think that would invite legal issues that if something was to occur on the premises of a social district?
Do you mean the crown logo that the city uses? I don't think necessarily it's like the city seal that's going on these. I think there would be the creation of something that would be universal and so that all cups were easily identifiable as part of that specific social district.
Oh, okay. Now can a permittee sell more than one drink to a customer? If somebody says, I want to get this beer, or I want to get a beer for my friend here, or
Right, I think the ABC laws would still apply as far as how many drinks you could sell to one individual within these social districts. So same thing if you go to a football game and try to buy a beer for your wife, you're probably allowed to do that. But if you start saying, I'm going to buy a beer for my wife and my two friends, they're going to say, no, you can only buy 2 at a time. So those rules would still apply within the social districts.
Oh, okay. Now, how about things like firearms or weapons? I thought that even for concealed carry, they discourage having concealed carries in bars or whatever. So what about walking around in open carry? I mean, what provisions we have for, or are there any provisions other than just signage on business doors or whatever? Is that anybody giving that any thought?
Well, people that conceal carry can't have any alcohol in their system, is my understanding. But we have seen
that's correct.
in the room, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so any state statutes involving carrying a firearm and consuming alcohol would still apply in the social district. I wouldn't trump those concealed carry requirements. Or if anyone didn't have a permit but was carrying in violation, same thing. The state statutes for criminal enforcement would still apply.
Okay. Thank you. Okay,
Thank you, Mr. Phipps. Thorough as always. So we have a motion and a second to recommend to the full council the adoption of an ordinance allowing social districts in Charlotte for a vote to be taken August 22nd with a public comment agenda item on the August 15th council agenda. If there's no further discussion, then we'll do a quick roll call vote, starting with Mr. Newton.
Yes.
Mr. Bakari.
Yes.
Mr. Phipps.
yes.
I am a yes as well. So that is a 4-0 recommendation in the affirmative to the full council. Is there anything else we need to address or cover today?
Final point of privilege. I'd just like to say it has been an honor to have you serve as the chair of this committee over some very trying times, and wanted to recognize that and say how much we appreciated you.
It has been an honor, and I appreciate all of y'all as well.
I ditto those comments.
Me too.
Phipps, are you sure you don't have any follow-on questions for that comment?
No, I'll write them down for the next council to pursue.
Well, then we shall adjourn our final State Communities Committee meeting for this council term. Thank you all for your help, and speak with you soon.
Bye,
Okay.
everyone.